Welcome to Snail Story, where slow tales still find their way into the heart. Is there a pain quietly resting inside you, even though time has long passed? Today's story is about Eliot, a 10-year-old boy who survived a shipwreck in the middle of a storm. He lost his entire family in a heartbeat and thought he'd be alone forever. But then, through the gentle kindness of strangers and the quiet courage in his heart, Eliot learned how to walk through grief, not to forget, but to keep living. If this story touches your heart, please like, subscribe to Snail Story, and share it with someone who needs it. Because sometimes a single story is enough to warm someone's stormy season. Asterisk in the town of Salem, Oregon, summer always arrived with a gentle lullaby sung by nature itself. The trees stood lush and green. The air was warm, and the laughter of children echoed through every narrow street. For Eliot James, an 11-year-old boy who had just finished 5th grade, this was the summer he had longed for more than anything else. Not because of video games or backyard camping trips, but because, this year, his whole family was going on a real vacation to Gold Beach, a coastal town 6 hours away by car. "Eli, are you sure you've packed your toothbrush?" his mother Nora called out while checking the suitcases. "I did, Mom. And even if I forgot, couldn't the ocean clean my teeth too?" Eliot peeked his head out of his room, eyes gleaming mischievously. His dad, Matthew, chuckled, shaking his head as he pulled a suitcase toward the car. Eliot's little sister, 6-year-old Ruby, clutched her teddy bear tightly, asking every 5 minutes whether the ocean would really be as blue as the pictures in her storybooks. This trip had been planned for months by 3 families who lived in the same neighborhood. They'd rented a wooden beach house together, agreed to share cooking duties, and even booked a sunset boat tour on the 3rd day. Everything had been prepared carefully, from sunscreen to Ruby's favorite cucumber sandwiches. Eliot loved the sea, but this would be the first time he actually saw it with his own eyes. He had read everything about ocean currents, whales, hot sand, and seashells. In his mind, he was already an explorer of the deep, armed with goggles and a brave heart. And when they finally arrived, the sea was just as beautiful as the books had promised. The first few days passed peacefully. In the mornings, the kids ran along the shoreline, leaving tiny footprints in the sand. By noon, everyone gathered to cook meals, the kitchen bursting with laughter. At night, they sat around the campfire, listening to Eliot's dad tell fairy tales. Eliot always protested with a smirk, "That can't be real, Dad." But on the morning of the 3rd day, the day of the boat ride, Eliot felt something off. Not fear. Not a clear premonition either. Just a strange weight in his chest when he looked out at the sea and saw soft gray clouds curling across the sky. "Looks like it might rain." Eliot mumbled over breakfast. "Where'd you learn that? Those clouds are nothing. Totally normal," his dad said, ruffling his hair. "But if it rains and gets windy, can the boat still go?" His parents exchanged a glance, then smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, the sea's still calm today. And the crew knows what they're doing, son." At exactly 2 p.m., everyone arrived at the dock. It wasn't raining, but the wind had picked up. Small waves lapped at the wooden pier. The captain, a man in his 50s with a calm face, assured everyone that the weather was still within safe limits. Eliot stepped onto the boat, gripping his small backpack tightly. Inside were a hand-drawn map, a bottle of water, and the journal he planned to write in throughout the trip. His family chose seats at the back, a quiet spot with the best view of the sea. Ruby leaned in to whisper to their mom, "The ocean is huge. Do you think there are real mermaids out there?" Their mother smiled, but before she could answer, the boat engine rumbled to life. Slowly, they pulled away from the dock, slicing through the first gentle waves. "Do you remember how to use your life jacket?" Eliot's father asked. "Yup, pull it over my head, tighten under the arms, and pull the cord if I need to float." "Fast, smart boy." His dad patted his shoulder. Eliot sat by the window, eyes fixed on the water. But this time, it wasn't out of excitement. He noticed something uneasy about the sea. The wind was stronger now. Tiny sprays of water flicked across the glass. 15 minutes later, the rain began to fall, and then the fog rolled in. Not thick, but enough to blur the horizon. The adults began murmuring to each other. Little Ruby curled into her mother's lap, her eyes wide. Eliot kept his gaze locked outside, gripping the seat tightly. A chill settled in his chest. Not from the wind, but from a worry that was growing quietly inside him. "Dad," Eliot whispered, "what if the rain gets worse?" His father turned to him, paused for a moment, then gently stroked his head. "If something goes wrong, just remember one thing. Don't panic. Breathe slowly. Grab onto anything that floats. And know this, we'll be right there with you, no matter what." Eliot didn't fully understand what those words meant, but he nodded anyway. Outside, the waves had begun to roar, a silent warning in the language of the sea. The wind began to howl, like a distant voice crying out in the middle of the ocean. The boat pressed forward, but it no longer moved as gently as it had when leaving the dock. The ripples had become waves layer after layer crashing against the hull, making the vessel sway in unpredictable jerks. Eliot sat by the window, his palms damp with sweat. His eyes were locked onto the surface of the sea, which had now turned to a dull, stormy gray, no longer the brilliant blue it was. That morning he could hear a soft voice across the cabana. Mother comforting her child. "It's just a bit of rain. It'll stop soon, sweetheart. Don't be scared." But even her voice trembled with uncertainty. Ruby, his little sister, clung tightly to their mother. Her eyes filled with worry. "Is the ocean angry, Mama?" "No, darling," their mom replied with a fragile smile. But Eliot noticed how tightly her arms were wrapped around Ruby. A low thud sounded from the front deck. Passengers began to murmur anxiously. Eliot looked toward his father, who was standing near the stairs to the upper deck, speaking quietly with the captain. "The weather's shifted too fast," the captain said in a low, grim voice. There was no warning on the radar. Eliot's father asked in a hushed tone, "Should we turn back?" "If we do, it'll take twice as long against the waves," the captain replied. "I'll slow us down. If it gets worse, I'll call the rescue station." At that very moment, a massive wave slammed into the side of the boat, tilting it sharply. Panic erupted inside the cabin. Children cried out. People grabbed onto seats or stumbled into one another. Eliot was thrown sideways, clinging desperately to his armrest. Ruby screamed in terror as their mother held her tight, shielding her with her body. The boat steadied for a brief second. But no one was calm anymore. The quiet whispers had turned into frantic prayers and fearful shouting. Outside, the sky darkened. Rain pounded against the windows like 1,000 angry fists. Lightning lit up the waves below, revealing a furious sea that seemed to come alive, surging like a swarm of monsters. Eliot's stomach twisted into knots. Not from motion sickness, but from something more ancient, a primal fear. That helplessness a small human feels when faced with the raw fury of nature. A crew member shouted over the noise, "Everyone, put on your life jackets. Stay calm." Eliot's hands fumbled under his seat, searching for the life vest. His fingers were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. His father turned back, grabbed the vest, and helped him slip it over his head. "Look at me, Eli," his father said firmly, eyes locked onto his son's. "Listen closely." "I'm listening," Eliot whispered. "If anything happens, swim away from the boat. Keep your breathing steady. Don't try to come back. I'll be right behind you." Eliot nodded, but his throat tightened. He saw his father's eyes were at red. His mother had already secured Ruby's vest and was now tightening her own. No one said another word. There was only the sound of panicked breathing and the relentless pounding of waves on the deck. Then the unthinkable happened. A sharp explosion rang out from the back of the boat. Maybe the generator had been hit by seawater. The lights inside flickered, then went out completely. The ship shuddered violently. Eliot heard the piercing sound of metal tearing. Something was breaking apart. His father shouted, "Hold on! We might capsize." And as if the sea had heard the command, a monstrous wave rose like a wall and came crashing down. Eliot saw water engulf the windows. People screamed. A heavy object flew across the cabin and smashed into a seat, shattering. The glass, wind, water, and voices were swallowed up in a terrible crack. The ship's frame tilted sharply to one side. "Eli, swim." His father's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Eliot sprang from his seat, bolting toward the prow. "Open hatch." But just as he reached it, a surge of water swept him off his feet, slamming him against the steel floor. His head struck the edge of a machine darkness. He didn't know how much time had passed. When Eliot opened his eyes, there was an eerie silence. He was lying in a narrow compartment, everything around him pitch black. The distant sound of rain, the soft dripping of water, and no one else, no dad, no mom, no Ruby, only cold, darkness, and the rapid, terrified heartbeat of an 11-year-old boy. Eliot pushed himself upright. Blood trickled from his forehead. His lips were pale, but deep in his eyes a small flame had just been lit. He had to survive. Eliot. James opened his eyes in the dark. The first sound he heard wasn't a voice calling his name. It wasn't the sea. It was the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, one beat at a time. Like a lone drum in a concert with no audience. He didn't know where he was. Above him, rusted iron beams dripped with water. The space was cramped. No light. And around him, the sharp smell of engine oil, the salty sting of the sea, and the metallic scent of blood. His forehead burned on one side. Eliot reached up and felt it wet. Blood. But he didn't scream, didn't cry. He just closed his eyes for 1 second, breathing in deeply, just like his father had taught him. When you don't know what to do, breathe. Don't let panic. Take the lead. 1 breath. 2. Then he opened his eyes again and tried to sit up. Eliot was in the engine room at the back of the boat, the place he'd been thrown into before blacking out. Somehow, it hadn't completely sunk yet, or maybe it was floating thanks to the sealed compartments. A random stroke of luck. He looked around. Total darkness. But he could hear something faint in the distance, the soft lapping of water and a metallic rattling sound. Maybe a door shifting with the waves. Eliot crawled toward it. Every movement sent sharp jolts of pain through his body. But he didn't stop. His father's voice echoed again in his memory. If you're alive, take the next step. Every step is a promise. The small door on the right, slightly ajar, blocked by a broken pipe. Eliot used both hands and pushed. A dry, metallic snap broke the silence. A narrow beam of dim light spilled through the light of the world outside. He crawled out. The door opened onto the slanted deck of the rear boat, now knee-deep in water. The rain was still falling, but the fog had begun to thin. In the distance, Eliot heard something, a horn. Or was it the sound of a rescue engine? Hope sparked like a flicker of fire. But he didn't know if it was real or just a hallucination. He moved forward, or rather dragged himself across the slippery deck, grabbing onto anything floating. A rope, a plastic crate, a torn life vest. Then the sound grew clearer. A horn, this time unmistakable. "Help! I'm here! I'm here!" Eliot screamed, his voice hoarse from cold and fear. He waved his arms, but he was so weak he could barely lift them. Just when he feared the sound had only been in his mind, he saw it. A beam of light cutting through the fog. A voice called out, "Is anyone there?" Eliot broke down crying. It's for the first time since the boat had capsized. "I'm here. My name is Eliot James. My parents, they're missing my sister. I was trapped." In the boat, a rescue raft drew closer. 3 people in bright orange jackets jumped aboard. One of them, a man with salt and pepper hair, rushed toward Eliot, dropping to his knees and wrapping him in his arms. "You're okay now. We've got you. You're safe." Eliot collapsed into his arms. He couldn't speak anymore. But his small hands clung tightly to the man's jacket, holding on like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Another rescuer threw a rain poncho over him, checking his pulse and wounds. "I'm so cold," Eliot shivered. "You'll be all right. The ambulance is waiting at the dock." On the way back, Eliot lay motionless in the rescuer's lap, clutching a soaking wet teddy bear, something one of the crew had just pulled from the water. "Your sister's bear?" the man asked softly. Eliot nodded, silent. A single tear fell onto the plastic raincoat. No one could tell if it was Eliot's or the rescuer's. At Coos Bay Hospital, doctors rushed Eliot into the emergency room. The cut on his forehead was stitched. His body temperature was low, but his heartbeat remained strong. The boy had survived, but when he woke up, the first thing he asked wasn't, "Where am I?" It was, "Where's my dad? Where's my mom? Where's Ruby?" No one answered. Right away, the nurses looked at each other. The doctor bowed his head. And in the hallway outside, a woman who had just flown in from New York, Lillian Hayes. Eliot's maternal aunt stood crying, his hands trembling as she held a page listing the names of the recovered victims. She didn't know how to tell him the truth. She only knew one thing. Her nephew was the only survivor. The hospital room was stark white, silent. A small bed sat in the center of the large space where Eliot James lay sleeping, his hands bandaged, his head wrapped in gauze, and his feet resting on 2 soft pillows to keep him warm. He wasn't dreaming, and if he was, it wasn't a pleasant dream. It was the sound of splintering wood. It was his father's voice shouting, "Swim." Through the storm, it was his mother's eyes, full of seawater. Turning back to hold Ruby as the little girl cried in her arms, Eliot jolted awake, gasping for air, cold sweat soaking the back of his neck. Morning light filtered through the foggy hospital window. Outside, the sky was impossibly blue and calm. No rain, no waves. Only the faint, faraway song of birds, like music from another world. A nurse stepped into the room and, seeing Eliot awake, gave him a gentle smile. "You're awake, Eliot. You're at Coos Bay Hospital. You're safe now." Eliot stared at her, his eyes blank. "Where's my dad? My mom? Ruby? Where are they?" The nurse hesitated for a second, then said softly, "Your Aunt Lillian is outside. She'll come in to see you soon." The door closed behind her. Eliot sat still. His heart pounded wildly, as if warning him of something unspoken. He turned to the window. A small sparrow perched on the railing, tilting its head toward him, as if asking, "Are you okay?" The door opened again. Lillian Hayes stepped inside. A woman in her early 40s, hair tied back, her face drawn and weary from the cross-country flight from New York to Oregon. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice still carried that soft tone, the one she used when she read Eliot bedtime stories. Years ago, Eli Aunt Lillian Eliot whispered, as if clinging to a single familiar piece of his shattered world. Where are they?" "My parents, Ruby." She didn't answer right away. She sat at the edge of the bed, gently holding Eliot's bandaged hand. His fingers were ice cold. "You're a brave boy, Eli. So brave." "No, I just did what Dad told me to do. He told me to swim away. I tried, but the waves, they were too strong. I hit something, and when I woke up, I was alone." His voice trembled. He looked straight into her eyes. "But they're okay, right? They were saved, right?" Lillian's tears finally fell. She couldn't pretend anymore. She slowly shook her head. "Eli, I'm so sorry." "They didn't make it." Eliot froze. A silence, so deep it seemed to drain the room of all sound. No, that can't be. Dad knows how to swim. Mom always made sure we wore life jackets. Ruby had Lucky with her. We searched all night." Lillian choked out. "The rescue team, they did everything they could, but the waves were too strong. By the time they got there, only you were still." A single tear slid down Eliot's cheek. No sobbing, no wailing. He just sat there, motionless like driftwood washed ashore, sure where to float next. "I'm sorry, I wish I could change it all," Lillian whispered, pulling him gently into her arms. But the boy didn't hug her back. He sat still, eyes staring blankly at nothing. After a long silence, Eliot asked in a whisper, "Do I have anyone else?" "You have me, and I'll be here. Always. Do I have to live with you?" "In New York. Only if you want to. Only when you're ready." Eliot was quiet for a while. Then he whispered, "I want to go home, back to the old place. I want to see my room. Ruby's bed. Their wedding photo on the table. I want to know that not everything is gone." That afternoon, Eliot sat by the window, sunlight glinting across his damp eyelashes. He opened his journal, the one they had found inside his soaked backpack. He wrote, "The day after the storm. I'm still alive, but Mom, Dad, and Ruby are not. I feel empty, like the ocean after the waves have gone. But Aunt Lillian says the sky will be clear again. I don't know when, but I'll wait." And for the first time since the wreck, Eliot looked up at the sky. The sparrow was still there. He whispered, "Can you hear me, Dad? Mom? Ruby? I'm sorry I survived, but I promise I'll live for all three of us." 3 weeks after the accident, it was a bright morning in late July. The sky was so blue, it was hard to believe a storm had ever passed through. Eliot was coming home. The silver-gray car rolled down familiar streets, past the tiny grocery store where his parents used to buy fresh bread in the mornings, past the park where Ruby once clung tightly to her teddy bear Lucky on the swings. Eliot sat in the back seat with Aunt Lillian. He hadn't spoken a word since leaving the hospital. He just held on to his old backpack, the only thing that had survived the storm intact. When the car turned into lane 19 and stopped in front of the little white wooden house with blue window frames, Eliot didn't move. He kept still. His face was calm, but his hands trembled slightly. "Do you want to wait a bit?" Lillian asked gently. Eliot shook his head. He opened the car door and stepped out. Each step was slow, as if every footfall carried the weight of 1,000 memories crashing down all at once. The small gate clicked open with a familiar clack. Everything was still there, the rose bed his mom had planted, though the petals were now wilted. Ruby's old bicycle leaned against the porch, its seat dusty. The swing chair where Dad used to read the newspaper swayed gently in the wind. Eliot placed his hand on the door handle. One deep breath. Then he turned it. The house opened, not with noise, not with grandeur, but with a dense silence that poured. In light cold air, he stepped inside the living room. Dad's coat still hung behind the door. Mom's ceramic coffee mug sat on the table beside a half-read book. Ruby's teddy bear, Lucky, lay on the couch wearing its little pink bow. Eliot walked over and picked it up, holding it close as if wrapping his arms around every memory of his sister. He didn't cry, but his eyes were swollen. As he looked around, everything seemed frozen in time, waiting for someone to come back, and only he had returned. He climbed the stairs. Each wooden step creaked, as if remembering the sound of little feet running. Voices calling out to each other. Ruby's room, all pink and covered in animal stickers. Her desk still had an unfinished drawing, an elephant with oversized ears and a crooked smile. Eliot touched the sketchpad gently. "You didn't finish coloring it, Ruby?" He opened her closet. Her favorite white dress still hung there, smelling faintly of the familiar detergent Mom always used. Suddenly, Eliot sank to the floor, silent. Motionless then, from deep within. He pressed his face against her dress and broke down in tears. For the first time since being rescued, Eliot truly cried, not for physical pain, but for a loss too deep for words. Downstairs, Lillian stood in the hallway, gripping her phone tightly, tears welling in her eyes. But she didn't go up. She knew this was a pain Eliot had to meet alone, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, Eliot quietly opened the door to his own room. The poster of his favorite soccer team still hung on the wall. On his desk sat the model ship Dad had given him for his birthday. The wooden bed, with a galaxy print pillow Mom had sewn herself. Everything was still there, but nothing felt whole anymore. Eliot sat down on the bed and took out his journal. He wrote, "The day I came home. Everything looks the same, but no one is here. I walked the hallway, hoping someone would call my name, but there was only wind. I cried. For the first time, I truly felt lost. But Ruby's teddy bear waited for me." Her room was still lit. Maybe love never really leaves. He closed the journal and sat in silence. Outside, sunlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow on the model ship. A small light, but warm enough. Eliot whispered, "I'm home now. I'm home, Dad." August in Oregon was full of sunshine. But inside Eliot, the sky remained gray. A week after returning to his old house, Eliot moved in temporarily with Aunt Lillian in a quiet neighborhood near his former elementary school. Each morning, she made ginger tea and set breakfast in front of him, just like his mother used to. But Eliot only ate half, washed his dishes in silence, then quietly stepped around her gaze. Heavy with unspoken sorrow. "You can stay home longer if you're not ready," Lillian offered gently. "I want to go back to school," Eliot replied, his voice flat. Not because he was ready, but because sitting still in a silent house for too long, he had begun to fear the sound of his own thoughts at school. The moment Eliot walked through the gate on his first day back, the world seemed to pause. Familiar classmates glanced at him, curious, unsure, pitying. His homeroom teacher, Ms. Holly, knelt down and hugged him gently. "I'm so glad you're back. Eliot, you don't have to do anything today. Just sit quietly, okay?" He nodded. The classroom looked the same. The desks were still in their usual spots. But the little desk in the back right corner, where Ruby once sat during first grade, was empty now. And the desk by the window, his own, stayed empty until Eliot slowly, quietly filled the space, as if trying to seal a crack no one dared to look at. That day, Eliot didn't speak. No one called his name. At lunch, he sat alone by the edge of the playground, holding a peanut butter sandwich, eyes watching a line of ants carry crumbs across the dirt. Everything around him was bustling, noisy. But to Eliot, it felt like he was hearing it all through glass. 3 days passed. No one talked to him, no teasing, no touching. Just absence, as if Eliot had become a question no one wanted to answer. A silent pause in a song made entirely of laughter. He wasn't angry. But every night, when he returned home, Eliot opened his journal and wrote, "No one looks at me for long. No one asks what happened. They look at me like I'm a closed door. And every time they turn away, I feel smaller." On Friday night, while Aunt Lillian sat sewing a loose button on his shirt, Eliot asked softly, "Do you think I'll ever be the same again?" Lillian looked up, pausing mid-stitch. "No, Eli. You won't be the same." His eyes dropped. "But She smiled gently, her gaze as warm as his mother's. That doesn't mean you can't become something wonderful in a new way. Eliot looked down. Her words seeped quietly into his heart like warm water. On Monday morning, something unexpected happened. During art class, when Ms. Haley asked the students to draw a place where you feel safe. Eliot didn't plan to draw anything, but then he picked up his pencil and began. He drew a small wooden chair by a window, his mother's ukulele leaning beside it, Ruby's teddy bear Lucky resting below, and a family photo frame on a table nearby. When it came time to share, Eliot didn't raise his hand. But Ms. Haley gently asked, "Eliot, would you like to tell us about your drawing?" He almost shook his head. But then, from the corner of the room, a voice spoke up. "I'd like to hear Eliot share." Everyone turned. It was Mara Bennett, a girl with messy hair and oversized round glasses. Most kids didn't notice Mara, but today she sat up straight, looking at Eliot with eyes that held no fear, no pity, only the quiet, steady light of someone who truly wanted to listen. Eliot hesitated. Then he stood up. "This is the corner of our living room, where my mom used to play ukulele. My sister Ruby would sit and listen. My dad would read. And I'd sit and just watch them. Now it's just me. But I still remember that room every night." The class went quiet. No one clapped. But something shifted in the silence. Mara nodded gently. "That picture feels warm. Thank you for sharing." That afternoon, as Eliot left school, he saw Mara waiting near the gate. She handed him a small folded note, then ran off without a word. Eliot opened it. Inside, written in neat, slightly wobbly handwriting, "If you'd like, I could sit with you at lunch tomorrow. I lost my mom when I was in first grade. No one's story is the same, but maybe I understand a little of what you feel. Eliot." Looked down at the note. For the first time in many days, something stirred in his chest. Not loud, but real, like the first leaf falling after a storm, a quiet sign that another season was beginning. Autumn arrived quietly. Golden leaves began to drift down onto Aunt Lillian's porch roof, like little letters from the sky, softly reminding that time moves on. No matter how much the heart wants to stay still, Eliot woke early each day, ate breakfast, and went to school on time. He still spoke little, but now, every so often, a faint smile would appear fleeting. But real Mara had become Eliot's first friend in the world after the storm. They often sat together in the library, reading books about the ocean and animals, sometimes drawing strange pictures, ones where Ruby was a princess riding a whale, and his parents were twin lighthouses lighting the way. One afternoon, while Lillian was organizing books in the living room, Eliot stood silently behind her. He was holding Lucky the bear, gripping the worn fabric on its foot tightly. "Aunt Lillian," Eliot said softly. She turned, smiling. "Yes, sweetheart. I want to visit Mom and Dad. And Ruby?" Lillian paused. Her eyes were gentle, but she couldn't hide her concern. "Are you sure you're ready?" Eliot didn't answer right away. He sat down on the couch, holding the bear tighter, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he spoke, so softly. It felt like the words would disappear if said any louder. "I miss them so much." His voice cracked. "I tried not to think about it, but every night I dream we're all having dinner together. Then I wake up, and it's just me, with you." He wiped at his tears. But the more he wiped, the more they came. "I hated that I survived at first. But now I just want to see them. One more time, even if it's just their grave." Lillian didn't say anything. She sat down beside him, pulled him gently into her arms. And in that quiet embrace, Eliot cried, truly cried. No more holding back. No more pretending. Lillian didn't shush him. didn't tell him to be strong. She just stayed there, letting him be small, letting him fall apart, letting him be seen in his grief, and letting that grief have space to breathe. That weekend, the sky was clear. Lillian took Eliot to a cemetery just outside town, where his parents and Ruby had been buried together. A small patch of land, surrounded by red maple trees. Eliot walked slowly, every step pulling him deeper into memory. The pale gray headstone held all three names, the same date beneath them. He stood still. A soft breeze passed. Eliot lowered his head. Then, carefully, he placed Lucky, now freshly washed, on Ruby's grave. "Lucky will watch over her," he said, voice shaking, but steady. Then he sat down and laid his hand on the cold stone. "I don't know why I'm the only one who lived, but I'll keep living for you, for Ruby." He took a deep breath. "I promise I won't stay silent anymore. I'll tell people about you, about all of you, not with tears, but with the most beautiful things I remember." Lillian turned away, but couldn't hide her tear-filled eyes. That afternoon, on the ride home, Eliot asked, "If I wrote a book one day, do you think anyone would read it?" Lillian smiled. "If you write from the heart, there will always be someone who listens." Eliot nodded, whispering, "Then I'll start writing about the boat, about Mom and Dad, about Ruby, about everything. Because I think that's how I'll keep them with me, not with tears, but through a story." By the end of October, Class 5B received their semester project. Tell the world your story. But Ms. Halley didn't just want a simple presentation. She asked her students to tell something real, a memory, a moment that made them feel like they had grown. As the class buzzed with ideas and topics, Eliot sat quietly, head bowed. Mara leaned over and whispered, "Do you want to share something?" Eliot hesitated, then asked, "If I tell the truth, do you think people will be scared?" Mara gave a gentle smile. "I'm not scared. I think everyone needs to hear a brave story." Eliot and Mara worked on the presentation together. Eliot drew a layout of the boat, a white vessel called Morning Star. Mara built a model of the life vest Eliot had clung to, and sewed a small stuffed bear that looked like Lucky to place beside it. The night before the presentation, Eliot sat in front of the mirror, practicing his speech. He held the paper, but his hands were shaking. Aunt Lillian came in and sat beside him. "You can stop if you're not ready," she said softly. Eliot shook his head. "No, I want to tell it, because if I don't, then it's like Mom, Dad, and Ruby were never real." On presentation day, the classroom was completely silent. Eliot stood in front of the class. No microphone, no music. Just his voice, soft but steady. "These are my mom, dad, and little sister. We went on a boat trip together. It was a rainy day. A storm came." He paused, took a deep breath. "My dad said, 'You have to swim out. Keep breathing and hold on to something that floats.' I jumped into the water. A wave threw me against the deck. I crawled into the engine room. Later, I heard voices and climbed out through a window and was rescued." Eliot pulled out a crumpled newspaper clipping. It read, "11-year-old boy miraculously survives boat. Capsizing, family missing." People called me the lucky boy, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt lost. I miss my parents and my sister every day, but because of the people who stayed, like Aunt Lillian and Mara, I've learned to carry my family not with sadness, but in the things I do every day. I'm not telling this story so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling it because no matter how big the storm, you can still find the light. When Eliot bowed his head, the class applauded, not loudly, but warmly. Mara stepped up and placed the little stuffed Lucky on the table. "This is Class 5B's version of Lucky," she said. "So he knows he's not alone anymore." Ms. Halley came forward and hugged Eliot. "You just did something most people are never brave enough to do. I'm proud of you." 3 days later, a journalist named Jules Green from the local news station came to meet Eliot. She had written the first article about the accident. Now, after hearing about Eliot's presentation, she wanted to interview him for a special segment called The Young Voices, Small Voices. Powerful strength. Eliot looked at Aunt Lillian. She nodded. You have the right to choose. But if you want your parents and Ruby to be remembered, maybe this is the moment. Eliot agreed. But he said, I'll only do it if I can first go back to the beach, the one where the boat went down. I want to say goodbye for real this time. Jules arranged the trip. Eliot, Aunt Lillian, and Mara took a small shuttle bus, traveling 3 hours to Crescent Bay, where Morning Star had disappeared beneath the sea. When they arrived, the wind was still. The ocean stretched endlessly, deep blue, unnervingly calm, as if a storm had never touched it. Eliot walked slowly to the edge of the shore, looking far out to sea. From his pocket, he pulled out a paper boat folded from one of Ruby's old drawings. He placed it gently on the water and let the waves carry it away. I've come back, not to search for what I lost, but to say this: I lived. And I will live, truly. He took a deep breath. His eyes shimmered, not heavy this time, but clear. Mara stood behind him, lightly taking his hand. And Aunt Lillian whispered, Your Mom, Dad, and Ruby are smiling right now. Asterisk, after Eliot's appearance on The Young Voices, his name spread far and wide, not as the surviving victim, but as a storyteller with quiet courage. Letters poured in from students across different schools. Some had lost their mothers, others had lost brothers. One simply wrote, I don't know exactly how you feel, but I've had nights when all I could do was cry. Thank you for saying what I never dared to. Eliot never imagined his words could travel so far. He sat in the living room reading each letter, sometimes glancing over at Mara, who patiently folded the papers, making neat notes of each sender. One quiet weekend afternoon, while placing the letters into a box, Eliot noticed a cream-colored envelope. There was no name, only the school's address and one handwritten line to the boy who survived. Inside was a thin sheet of paper folded into quarters. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. You don't know me, but I was on that boat. Was the engine technician the last person who saw your father put you into the water, telling you to swim far? I didn't save anyone. I survived, but for the past 2 years, I haven't dared return to the sea. I haven't told a soul. When I saw you share your story, I cried. Not because you lived, but because you forgave yourself. Something I haven't done. I'm going back to the sea. Thank you for reminding me. There's still light after the storm. Eliot read the letter in silence, his breath caught. That evening, he handed the letter to Aunt Lillian and Mara. Do you think that person is real? Lillian nodded gently. I think they're waiting not for your forgiveness, but their own. Eliot folded the letter carefully and placed it in a wooden box labeled, The People I Carry With Me. I want to write down the stories of everyone I've met, he said. Even those I don't know by name, but who've left footprints in my life. A week later, Eliot and Mara launched a new project, a support group called Silent But Not Lost. It started with just 3 members, Eliot, Mara, and Jamal, a classmate who had lost his father in a car accident. They met every Thursday in the school library. There were no agendas. No one had to speak if they didn't want to. The only rule: anyone who showed up was allowed to be silent or to speak, and no one would interrupt. Eliot made a small sign for the group with their motto, You don't need to be strong. You just need to be real. Ms. Halley gave her full support. She told them, sometimes it's the children who teach adults how to face loss, not with logic, but with heart. At a special meeting, Eliot brought a gift. He opened his wooden box and took out an old photo. His parents, Ruby, and himself, all smiling on a beach. I used to be afraid to look at this picture, Eliot said. But now, I think if I hide it, then I'm burying their joy along with the pain. I want people to remember them by this smile, not by the headlines. Jamal began to cry. Mara gently held his hand. Nothing needed to be said. That night, as Aunt Lillian passed by Eliot's room, she noticed the light still on. Inside. Eliot was writing. The first line on the page read, Chapter 1, The Day the Boat Left Shore. Lillian knocked and stepped inside. "You're writing your story again?" Eliot nodded. "Not so people will feel sorry, but so they'll understand. Even if you're the only one left, you can still begin again." 3 years after his first presentation in Class 5B, Eliot Miller stood on stage at the Boston National Library, facing an auditorium filled with students, teachers, parents, and strangers he had never met. In his hands was his very first book, The Boy Who Came Back Alone But Didn't Stay Alone. It was a real book, softcover. On the front, a paper boat drifting in the ocean. Under the stage lights, Eliot, now 14, stood taller, his voice deeper. But his eyes still held the storms they had seen and still searched for light. Ms. Hallie, now a school counselor, was the one who introduced Eliot to the stage. "There are stories we believe will never be told," she said, "because they hurt too much or feel too personal. But this boy, he chose not to share sadness, but the way he walked through it." The hall filled with warm applause as Eliot stepped forward and took the mic. He smiled gently and began. "Once there was a child who survived a shipwreck," he thought. "He'd lost everything, but he didn't know that loss doesn't mean the end. Sometimes it's just a detour to teach us how to love again, even with a wound in the heart." Eliot shared his story this time without trembling. He spoke of his father, mother, and Ruby as if they were sitting somewhere in the crowd. He told of Aunt Lillian, who listened when he couldn't speak, and of Mara, the first person to ask, "Are you okay?" without expecting a perfect answer. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, the support group card. He and Mara had started, now spread to 6 other schools. On it was written, "Pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you grow." Eliot held it up and said, "I used to think my boat had sunk forever. But today I know the boat may sink, but the people on it can learn how to swim." After the book launch, Eliot signed copies non-stop. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, with braided hair, came up holding a crayon drawing. "Eliot, this is you, Mara, and Lucky riding the boat again." Eliot looked down. 3 figures, 1 bear, and a sea filled with stars. He blinked back emotion. "Thank you," he said softly. "I think Lucky would love it too." That night, Eliot sat quietly in Aunt Lillian's living room. On the table lay a printed email from a man named Bryce Carter. "I was the engine technician on that boat. I still have a small silk scarf that fell near the seat, purple with a tiny heart. I believe it belonged to your sister. If you'd like, I'd love to return it. And if I may, thank you for giving me a reason to write my first letter after 3 years of hiding." Eliot held the paper gently, fingers tightening around the edges. No need to reply right away. Just knowing others were learning to return, too, was enough. Later that night, he stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, but still. Mara sat with a blanket, sipping ginger tea. Aunt Lillian was nearby, trimming her lavender plants. Eliot sat beside them, leaning against the step. "How do you feel?" Mara asked. He paused, eyes on the dark sky. "Light," he said. "Like the wind at the end of a season, there's still a chill, but it doesn't sting anymore." From the house, soft notes of a classical song drifted out, one his mother used to play each morning. Eliot closed his eyes. He hadn't forgotten. But he no longer let memory keep him in the dark. Life moved forward. Not because the pain vanished, but because his heart had grown warm enough to carry it without it. Being heavy, he turned to Mara and whispered, "Let's go to the sea tomorrow, not to look for what we lost, but to sail the boat again." Mara smiled. "Yeah, let's sail it again." There are pains we may never erase, but we can learn to move forward without losing the love we once held dear. Eliot's story, the story of a smart, brave child, is not just about survival. It's about all of us who once thought we had to walk through sorrow alone, only to discover that when someone listens, a heart always finds its way back to warmth. Thank you for staying until the end. If you're carrying a quiet pain today, remember, you are not alone. And as Eliot once said, pain doesn't make you weak, it helps you grow. Please like, subscribe to Snail's Story, and leave a comment to share how this story made you feel, because who knows, your words might just be the light someone else has been waiting for.